When we study modern poetry, we see that there are different layers to it and different ways in which modern poetry is studied. War poetry is an integral part of that study. Hello and welcome back to Nibblepop. In this class, we are going to discuss the poem Spring Offensive by Wilfred Owen. The difference between the modern age and the other ages which went before it is that the modern period witnessed the two massive wars that split the whole world apart. People like Wilfred Owen give us the reality of that war because they were part of that military force which apparently fought with heroism and bravery, but in reality, they suffered more than anybody else during the period. Now, when you look at Owen's life, you'll see that he was born in 1893 and he died in 1918. So it's a very short life of 25 years. He got enlisted to fight in the British Army as part of the Allied forces, and sadly, he died exactly 1 week before the armistice was signed. Armistice means the end of the war. Owen's poetry gives us a very vivid idea about what went on that battlefield, because usually when people talk about wars, about soldiers, about military forces, they talk about patriotism, they talk about nationalism, they talk about heroism. What Owen talks about is the reality of warfare, where he will take away all the romantic notions of warfare which people are fed from their childhood. In this poem, which is considered to be one of his best poems, we will see how he brings out these battles of war and how he makes us realize the futility of war. The title, Spring Offensive, refers to the Battle of Kaiser, which was fought in 1918. It happened when Germany made successive attacks on the western frontiers of the Allied forces, and these attacks were called the Spring Offensive. Now, what we see here is a first-hand account of one of these offensive attacks, offensive in the sense military attack, where a group of soldiers face a sudden attack of artillery while they were trying to reach a safe place. Like many of his poems, Owen brings the whole scene of the battlefield right in front of our eyes, and he does not begin with any unnecessary philosophizing. He brings you straight to the scene and he begins with the description of what he wants us to visualize. Halted against the shade of a last hill, they fed. So he's talking about a group of soldiers who are marching towards a safe destination, and they stood against the shade of a last hill. Why last? Because this is going to be the last hill they are going to cross before they reach the safe place, or maybe this is the last hill because death was waiting for them on the other side of it. So this is a very metaphoric use of the words here. They fed and lying easy were at ease. So this is a moment of relaxation for the soldiers, because right now they don't have any danger of being attacked. They are having these feelings of security, and soon we will see how futile such feelings are. And finding comfortable chests and knees, carelessly slept. So these soldiers, they were spending some relaxing moments before they embarked on that final journey towards that shelter. But many there stood still to face the stark blank sky beyond the ridge. So some of the soldiers were asleep, they were taking rest, some of them were awake, alert, knowing their feet had come to the end of the world. Notice the recurrent use of this expression, end of the world, last hill. So as if this reality which the soldiers were witnessing around them was miles away from their reality. It was the end of the world, because the World War itself was an unprecedented massacre that the world was witnessing. And these soldiers, they were the first-hand witnesses of the brutalities of the First World War, and they felt like this was the end of the world. This was the end of humanity. Marveling, they stood and watched the long grass swirled by the May breeze, murmurous with wasp and midge. Midge are those small little insects which fly about in spring. So these soldiers, they were looking at the natural surroundings, the wasps, the midge, the grass which was, swirling in air. For though the summer oozed into their veins like the injected drug for their bones' pains, so these soldiers, they were exhausted. They had been through a lot of physical exertion. They had these painful joints and bones. The spring air was like a balm, was having a calming effect on their bodies, as if they were injected with a drug that soothed their pain. But sharp on their souls hung the imminent line of grass. So although the surrounding was calm and soothing, inside them, their souls were disturbed. Why? Fearfully flashed the sky's mysterious glass. So they were aware that this kind of calm, this kind of serenity is going to be very short-lived. So it was like they were looking at the imminent line of grass, as if they were expecting danger to lurk very close by. Hour after hour, they pondered the warm field and the far valley behind. So notice the kind of expressions that Owen is using here. He is using long words like murmurous and ooze, words which produce an effect of calmness. You can almost have a reminiscence of Keatsian imagery here. The way Keats describes the autumn with the kind of relaxing and sensuous words. The same kind of expressions are used here by Owen. So why is he doing this? He's doing this to eventually break the spell. So he's now creating a spell of calm, like the calm before the storm. Hour after hour, they pondered the warm field and the far valley behind, where the buttercups are very beautiful yellow flowers, and they are shaped in the form of cups. Buttercups had blessed with gold, because they are yellow, their slow boots coming up. So while these soldiers were walking through that valley, these buttercup flowers, which are gold or which are yellow in color, their petals were hugging their feet as if blessing them, where even the little brambles would not yield, but clutched and clung to them like sorrowing hands, as if the brambles or the thorny bushes, they were trying to stop the soldiers, hug on to their legs and feet, and stop them from marching forward, because they were marching towards danger. So nature wanted them to stay back, not to venture forth. They breathe like trees unstirred. So now it's comparing these soldiers to the trees, because they have become devoid of emotions. All these emotional aspects of nature are not changing anything in them anymore. So they are unmoved like the trees. Till, like a cold gust, thrilled the little word, at which each body and its soul begirt and tightened them for battle. So these soldiers were unmoved up to the point when they received a word, a message. What message? They were given a message from their high command that they were about to encounter the enemies. They were about to begin fighting. So you notice that while nature is not anymore able to affect these soldiers, they are affected. They are stirred into action by the message of war. It is as if they are turned into robots, zombies, and have no ounce of humanity left anymore. So all they are doing is follow a mechanical code, a mechanical order, and that makes them do things which nature cannot. And what do? When they hear this word, each body and its soul, the soldier's body and soul, begird and tighten them for battle. Begird means it's like you surround something. So they are empowered to act. They are emboldened to act through that message. But there is a difference in the way they fight. No alarms of bugles, no high flags, no clamorous haste, only a lift and flare of eyes that faced the sun. So unlike the warfare of the past ages, when there used to be these heroic bugles, trumpets of war, music of war, and flags and ensigns, declaring a particular nation or a particular kingdom's army's position, these things were no more seen during the World War. So World War was the dirty war. It was no more the glorious heroic warfare of the time of Beowulf, of the time of Macbeth. So this is where this war became an ugly affair. There was no heroism, only drab reality. So the soldiers' eyes, they were facing the sun, and like a friend with whom their love is done. So there was no friendliness in the way they were looking at the sun, because the sun, its heat, it has only caused them more trouble. Oh, larger shone that smile against the sun, mightier than his whose bounty these have spurned. What does the sun give human beings? The sun gives life. The sun gives light. But the life and the light which the sun provides, which nature provides, is no more of any consequence to these soldiers. They have as if rejected the natural way of living. So they have spurned the bounty of nature. So here what we see is that while in case of romantic poets, we had seen that nature was providing man with a benevolent presence. Even in Victorian poetry, we had seen, if you remember Dover Beach, that nature is not as potent as it was during the Romantic period, but still it offers a kind of a consolation. But here, Owen is placing nature completely opposite to human beings, saying that there is no connection left anymore. There is no way that nature can provide sustenance to human beings, not under these circumstances at least. So soon they topped the hill, so they were going up against the hill, and raced together over an open stretch of herb and heather. So you can see the rhyme, bringing up the tension, creating a climax here. Exposed. And then this small word, exposed. So he takes you through a rhyme where he is building an expectation. They are running, they are racing, and you begin to expect some element of heroism now that they have decided to fight. And then this word exposed, this becomes almost like an anticlimax. And instantly the whole sky burnt with fury against them, and soft sudden cups opened in thousands for their blood. So the same sky which was providing them with a backdrop of calm, the same buttercup flowers which were offering them a soft place to walk on, that turns against these soldiers as if. So it's not that the sky actually became hostile. It's not that the flowers became hostile. The main problem is there was the enemy army who were firing at them. So you see what is happening? Nature is powerless. The same nature which was offering them respite, rest, the same nature becomes a participant in their destruction. And these buttercups, they were as if, opening their cups to collect the blood of the soldiers. Now, in many of the critical works, I've seen that there is a connection made between these blood collecting cups and the concept of the Eucharist, or the sacrifice of Christ, because Christ, he sacrificed his body, and because of that, the Christians, they consume wine saying that it's the blood of Christ. So all these images come into play here, as if Owen is trying to hold on to some element of heroism which could be possible under the circumstances. Perhaps, maybe this is heroic, he wants to mean. Especially when you talk about cup and blood, you remember, or you are reminded of the word chalice, which contained the blood of Christ when he died. So all these metaphors, they build up this element of suspense. And what happens then? What actually happens while this is happening here? And the green slopes, chasmed and steepened, sheer to infinite space. So this whole place as if cracked to swallow the soldiers down. Of them who running on that last high place leapt to swift unseen bullets. So there were soldiers who leapt up and there were bullets and they got killed immediately. Or went up on the hot blast and fury of hell's upsurge. So it's directly compared to hell. With all that fire and smoke and stench, it can be compared to nothing else. So Owen compares that battlefield to hell. Or plunged and fell away past this world's verge. So earlier he was talking about the last hill or the end of the world. So when the soldiers, they leapt beyond that place, they were as if, jumping off the verge of the world. So this is a way of describing the battlefield using expressions which exaggerate. But this exaggeration is important because this actually reflects the feeling of helplessness that Owen felt because he went through all this. This was his experience. This was felt by him. Some say God caught them even before they fell. So they died before their bodies touched the earth. Now when Owen mentions God, we begin to think, what was his religious belief at that moment? When he got enlisted, when he first went to France, he was enthusiastic. He wrote back to his mother saying that, I feel this as a thing of honor. I don't remember his exact word, but he meant this. But by and by, as he went through this drudgery of battle, through this day-to-day suffering, he saw God, he saw religion in a completely different light. So when he uses the expression that God caught them, perhaps he is using a kind of a mockery here, a kind of a satire here, that the consolation that when you die in a battlefield, you get elevated to a heavenly level. It's like God actually lifts you up. He questions that. But what say such as from existence's brink ventured, but drave too swift to sink, the few who rushed in the body to enter hell? So there were people who died before they entered the main battle place. There were some who managed to survive the initial shock, the initial artillery spell, and they managed to enter the main place where the battle was being fought. So that is described as hell. And there, outfiending all its fiends and flames. So the enemy soldiers, they are compared to fiends. And Owen says that the soldiers who rushed towards those fiends or devils, they were also being like devils, and they were being like more devilish than the enemy devils. So that is warfare. It's not who is more honorable. It's not who is right or wrong anymore. It's more about who wins and who loses, and whoever wins writes history, and that justifies everything. That is what Owen tries to say here. And they're outfiending all its fiends and flames with superhuman inhumanities. So this is kind of an oxymoron where you have two different kinds of words, opposite words in fact, placed side by side. Superhuman placed alongside with inhumanities. Why superhuman? Because the soldiers who manage to survive and fight on, they will be considered to be supermen, imbibed with superhuman qualities. But the fact that they had to fight and kill a fellow human being makes them inhuman. And what makes them inhuman is what happens, or what he writes after this. Long famous glories, immemorial shames. So the soldiers who managed to survive the battle, and they managed to somehow fight and still remain alive, they were considered to be glorious heroes. So they have long famous glories, but with that glory, they also carry within them the shame. What kind of shame? The shame of watching the reality of the war and still remaining silent. The shame of watching the fellow soldier die and do nothing about it. And here Owen is actually talking about the psychological breakdown, trauma that paralyzed a large portion of Europe's youth after the war. Crawling slowly back. So these soldiers who did not die that day, eventually maybe they survived the whole war, they crawled back, have by degrees regained cool, peaceful air in wonder. So maybe, later they recuperated, they revived when the war was over, they were back home, everything was peaceful. Then Owen is asking, why speak they not of comrades that went under? Why these soldiers who had been through this, who had survived this, silent about the soldiers who died that day? Now this is ironic because Owen himself dies later, not during the spring offensive, but in autumn. The point is, he is raising disturbing questions. Questions which are not supposed to be raised by a soldier. Questions that are not supposed to be raised by any human being who call themselves patriots. He is simply asking for a recognition of these sacrifices which these soldiers had to make. If you read the other poem, Dulce Decorum Es by him, there also he is questioning the whole paradigm of glory, the whole system of justifying warfare in the name of patriotism, in the name of heroism, in the name of nationalism. And he gives us the raw reality of war. Some people think that poetry should be emotions recollected in tranquility. Our dear Wordsworth thought that. But for Owen, there was no option of any tranquility. He died before he saw the end of the war. So all we have is a spontaneous overflow. When we look at this poem and try to judge whether it is a war poem or not, we encounter a very difficult question. The question is, what is a war poem? Is it a poem glorifying war? Or is it a poem deglorifying war, demystifying war. This is not just an anti-war poem, to use the exact word here. This is also an anti-heroic poem because it questions the ways in which heroes are worshipped and how that hero worship is basically a facade in which human beings are trapped. For your exams, you might be asked question on analyze this poem as an anti-war poem or a critical appreciation. In your answers, try to show how Owen is different from other poets. The way in which he writes this poem is different from the way in which an unlisted means somebody who is not a part of the army, an unlisted person writes about war. He saw the inner workings of this whole system and exposes. And in a way, we can say that he is offering you an omniscient point of view here, as if somebody is looking from outside with a camera on what is happening. He is not using the expression I or me or we here, like he uses in case of Dulcet Decorum, but here he uses a third person standpoint or perspective, perhaps to give a more objective view, because he knows that even in that objective view, when he takes himself away from the whole scenario, he will be able to reveal the demonic nature of war and the devastation that a battle means for the soldiers who fight. This is a very touching poem, and it's like he is calling out for help. He was a staunch supporter of anti-war causes, and that makes it even more tragic that he had to die while the war was still going on and breaking the world into pieces. I hope I have explained this poem well enough for you. If you want me to discuss more poems by Owen, you can write that in the comment section. If you want to thank me for this class, you can subscribe to my channel. That will really support us. So stay tuned till my next video. Till then, all of you stay very safe. Bye-bye.